we've been hearing the past couple months. But while putting these guidelines together, keep in mind that the goal was safety. And as we go tonight, we'll obviously keep coming back to that, keeping kids and members safe. But there's going to be some inconvenience, and there will be some differences from what we're used to. And we'll have to accept that if we want to get hockey back and keep it going. So we need to do the right things to keep as many people as safe as possible. Another thing with these guidelines is they may and likely will change as we go along in the upcoming months. I know for example, one thing that's not addressed in these guidelines is face masks, and that will be a question we get to later on. Right now, there's nothing in there about that. At some point, there may be, just as an example. So if things change, things could be added to these guidelines. So I want to say we want to get this right. It will be on all of us at the arenas to support each other, make sure others are doing the right things so hockey and quite frankly, other youth sports can keep moving forward and don't move backward. So we'll talk about why we came to the guidelines that we did. And we also want to reiterate that we're here as a resource to you guys as we go forward here. So if you have questions after this call throughout the summer, we'll have a slide at the end that has contact information for folks within Minnesota Hockey. You can also obviously contact your district directors. But we want to make sure that we're here to answer the questions when we can. And if we can't, we want to find out those answers as best we can for you guys. So with that, we'll move forward to where we are today. As you probably all know, youth sports in Minnesota are able to open on June 1st. Steve Oleheiser mentioned our collaboration with the Minnesota Amateur Sports Commission and MIAMA, and those partnerships have been outstanding for us. Working with them has been a huge benefit for all of us, and it's really important with these arenas to make sure we are on the same page and we're working together as we go forward and utilizing each other. The guidelines that we have are a phased return to play. Right now there's phase 1, which is what will happen starting June 1st, which is pretty much practices, clinics, limited number of players on the ice, keeping kids socially distant, and we'll get into more details on that. And then phase 2, which we hope to get later in the summer, introduces more gameplay. And then phase 3 is a little bit more like what we're used to. However, what that looks like, we don't know. So we're gonna keep our focus on phase 1 for the most part right now, and move forward there. There are some target dates within our guidelines as to when we move to phase 2 and phase 3, but I can't stress enough that those are just target dates and simply there to tell you when we hope to make announcements by whether or not we can move into those phases. However, there's so much at play there, including regulations from the government. So whether or not we can hit those dates remains to be seen, but we want to give people an idea that we intend to get back and introduce more hockey scenarios as we go here, but we want to do it right. And then lastly, just a piece we want to emphasize is we have a social responsibility in this. This is about hockey, but it's also about doing the right thing for society. And so the more we can do the right things and go along with the safety guidelines that are in place, the better chance we have of keeping more people safe and healthy. And that's key to all this. So with that, we're going to move forward here, and I'm going to turn it over to, first we'll talk about the guidelines that came from the Minnesota Department of Health. These pretty much should be viewed, these 4 things that we highlighted here should be viewed as mandates. They don't come from Minnesota Hockey. They are within our guidelines, but these really came from the state. And so there's not really any wiggle room here. Right now, we're allowed 2 pods of 10 skaters on the ice without mixing the 2 groups. Call it for an hour of ice time each time. Those pods of 10 include coaches. So if you have 2 coaches, you have 18 skaters. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Like I said, the practices or clinics or camps, whatever they may be, should be skill development focused. There shouldn't be contact, and there should not be games and tournaments going on right now. The big thing for Minnesota hockey to get these guidelines out now is for associations who do summer clinics, summer camps. So you guys have some guidelines here. There shouldn't be any games, tournaments, and we're well aware that there's other groups out there outside of Minnesota hockey that do games and tournaments. Obviously, our guidelines are not covering them. They're covering our associations. So as for the guidelines, this is when I'm going to turn it over to John Perry to go over the Minnesota hockey guidelines and the points of emphasis. We're not going to go through that whole document, but John is going to talk about some of the points of emphasis from that document that might have some questions attached to it. So John Perry, our Vice President of Hockey Operations, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, thanks, Glenn. I appreciate it. And I just want to echo what Glenn said is, first and foremost for us is everybody wants to get back to the game and everybody's excited to get back on the ice, but safety is a big issue for us. And we didn't just come up with a meeting last week. We've been meeting for the last month and a half, talking about ways we could help players with off-ice training on our website, and then also how can we get back to the game in a safe manner. One of the things that came through with some of the meetings we had was a symptom screener, and that was a form that we would use. I don't know if we can put that up at all, Glenn. And that would be to some questions for you to go through to fill out as a parent so that you can do some screening yourself before coming to the rink. And so it's really important that as parents, you think about doing that and get that done as you look at getting back on the ice. So for the 2021 USA Hockey registrations, everybody's going to have to be registered with USA Hockey in order to get ready to get back on the ice. And with that comes everything that's involved in our screening and everything else that goes along with. Those aren't going to change. Safe Sport's not going to change anything of that nature. So that's hockey as usual, registering through USA Hockey. Parent attendance and drop-offs, and if you look at the guidelines that were sent out, item 6 says players age 11 and older should be dropped off at the rink and then picked up afterwards. Their parents and guardians should not be in the arena, and then players age 10 and under are allowed 1 parent or guardian in the rink to help with equipment needs. Those parents and guardians may also be in the rink socially distanced from others to provide assistance to a player if needed throughout practice. Masks are advised and may be required for the facility. So I'm sure Matt will speak about this later on from Miami, but we would always adhere to whatever the arena has as far as a guideline as you come into the arena. And I assume in talking with Matt that they'll have ways for you to enter into the arena and exit the arena. And we would hope that everybody would follow those. Obviously, we can't completely tell someone to stay out of the rink. So if there's some special needs where you have to stay with a skater, understandable. But again, we would want you to practice the safe guidelines that are laid out by the state of Minnesota. Starting out, I think the 6 and under and learn to play, they really aren't a part of phase 1. We're keeping them out of the rink at this point in time. And again, as Glenn mentioned, this is a very fluid situation. It changes on a weekly basis. and those that might change during the time, but at this point in time, we're not encouraging anything at 6 and under or learn to play. Communication is really important, and communicating with your coaches. So when players arrive at the arena, we want to have them already communicating with the people that they're going to be skating with. So associations, we're encouraging them to put together development plans to bring them back into the arena, and then also have emergency and alert plans for if something should come up where someone was to get sick or something of that nature. We want to make sure that the associations would have that type of a plan put together ahead of time, so that when we get to the arena, if something comes up and someone has a symptom, we want to make sure that we get that person out of the building and into a specific room, which I'm sure most arenas will have as a place for that player to be in a safe place to go to. So those are the key things we wanted to do as you start into the arena. Again, they're going to change, but for us, it's a key part for us to start getting people back in. And also, number one over anything is to make sure that our players are safe. And I really want to reach out and thank the group that's been working basically for 2 months, putting development programs online for those who can't get in the rink, and then also working with the Minnesota Sports Commission and the governor to get us back into the rink.
Thanks, John. And again, John was just highlighting some of the key pieces to that. There are others that we put in there in terms of, kids should come fully dressed whenever possible, or they just should come fully dressed minus skates and helmet, and they should leave fully dressed too. They should be in and out no earlier than 15 minutes before and out no later than 15 minutes after. So there's things like that that would be great if people could follow. It should be doable if kids don't have to take off a lot of equipment. But there's some other things in there around that. So I encourage you to look at those guidelines carefully as you guys go and submit your plans or let your members know about your plans. Time to talk about the arenas, and Matt Hennen is joining us. And like I said, like Steve said, none of this can happen without partnership with the arenas. However, we know that arenas throughout the state are different. And so some might have different guidelines from Minnesota Hockey, and some might have different guidelines from the arena in the next town over. So we're going to let Matt talk a little bit about what the MIAMA group has gone through in terms of some of the overriding themes in their discussions. So I'll turn it over to Matt Hennen.
Thanks, Glenn. Thank you to Minnesota Hockey and the Minnesota Sports Commission and everybody worked with, Glenn, Max, Steve, for your support and working with MIAMA in these times to keep the rinks predictable situation, which is crazy, and to keep them safe. On the MIAMA side, pairing up with Minnesota Hockey and pairing up with everybody across the state, we sent a letter to the governor, tried opening up that door. We've talked to the Sports Commission, we've talked to the Department of Labor and Interior, and we've talked to some other groups throughout the state that are showing support to help us. As a group within MIAMA, we created a COVID-19 best practices, some 9 major things we thought were very important. And one of those is hand sanitation, keeping your 6-foot distance, covering your coughs, not trying to keep social gatherings going on outside the rinks, discouraging the handshake at the end or with the players, keeping within your pod, keeping your gloves on and keeping your gear on as much as possible. And as of most of the rinks across the state, we've created a theory of a one-way in, a one-way out. That's probably the best case scenario. That also brings up questions for the locker rooms. At this time, MIAMA is not advising you to use locker rooms. We're finding it with the rinks that are open right now as privately running. It's working out pretty good to set a timeline, allow your players 15 to 20 minutes to come into the rink, stay within the lobby area, wherever the rink finds them safe, and then allowing them to go onto the ice after the next group before them has exited the building completely, and then allowing that to make it safe, clean the area, disinfect, and move on with the next groups. I think that really caught the eye of a lot of people helping out to get back into the rinks. Other than that, I think we could maybe get into a little bit later, Glenn, but if you got some questions yourself too. But my strongest suggestion is to make a plan and then receive a plan from the arena, from the manager or whoever is in charge, and then go over that plan and seriously think about the plan and what you think works best. And then maybe if you don't feel comfortable with a face-to-face meeting, you send out messages and figure it out, or you allow a walkthrough, or you allow some communication to happen. Because I do believe also, like it was stated before, communication in these times is one of the biggest situations, probably the biggest hurdle to overcome, because before it was just sign your name on a piece of paper, bring your kid to the rink, and you're good to go, everything was taken care of. Well, now there's a little bit of rules involved on both sides, so I feel that communication, personal responsibility, pushing responsibility on parents and to tell their children that it's best for them to understand that to keep themselves safe is to, you know, you're back with your buddies, but there's a couple more rules. So, Glenn, do you have questions?
No, I think we will get into some questions later. I know that have come in on, you know, sort of who enforces some of the rules and who enforces some of the guidelines. Is that the coach? Is that the arena staff? Things like that. So stay on board and we'll get to those questions here in a little bit, if that's all right with you, Matt.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. And, you know, so Matt and the arena managers really are kind of focused on what's going on around that ice sheet. And then our hockey ops group really kind of got together to talk about what's going to happen on that ice sheet. You know, some of the things were mandated from the government, but there are some things too that our group put together that we think might ease some of the difficulties within hockey, within the on-ice product. And we are well aware that it's not going to be easy to keep kids socially distanced on the ice, especially at those younger ages. They kind of go all over the place. It's a lot to ask a coach to constantly monitor a kid being 6 feet away from the other 9 kids in their pod or the other 8 kids in their pod. So it's really about a best as you can situation here. And I'm going to ask Mike MacMillan, our director of high performance programs and a USAH hockey coach in chief, to talk about some of the on-ice considerations that we have in our guidelines going forward. So Mike, or Mac, as he's well known, go ahead.
I just screwed up my screen, so I'm hoping you're hearing me.
We hear you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Glenn. So a couple things. Going forward, the guidelines I think are pretty clear. I think what's going to end up happening for most coaches is what do we do in this new environment? And a couple pieces. Glenn mentioned the pods. Just to reiterate to the whole group, if you didn't see the chat, that the pod includes coaches and players. It also dictates that the coach can be on the bench, but that does not get you another player on the ice. And our recommendations is that you would have pods on the different parts of the rink. So we haven't talked to MIAMA yet, but one of the things that we probably should talk about is if there's arena or rink dividers, to maybe put those out, use those, and then that would allow for easier maneuvering around the rink and help with the separation as well. We have looked at lots of different options. Matter of fact, Minnesota Hockey and USA Hockey on both of their websites have practice plans available for coaches for different age-specific drills. I personally would recommend doing station-type practices and or individual skills practices. So you could even use a station, but you can also do individual skill training, i.e. skating, stick handling, passing, and shooting. Our preference, though, would be stations and get some movement going and modify the stations as we've laid them out in our materials that would meet the separation and no contact. I'm not going to lie to you, though, it's going to be really difficult on an ice surface to keep kids from getting to stay 6 feet apart. So there'll be some hurting that will be going on, but do your best when you're on the rink and have your coaches do the best. Small area games, a great concept if you can pull it off with no contact. I think there's ways to do that. If you take a look at our manuals on small area games on the USA Hockey website, I think you'll find some creative ways to do small areas. But again, you're going to have to limit contact and put in rules and definitions in those games that will make sure your players don't get set up to fail and put you in jeopardy. I know everyone is a little concerned about our cooperation and working together. And one of the things that Glen mentioned, I think it's worth repeating multiple times by each person on the call, is that we don't want to screw this up, because we want to get to phase 2 and we want to get to phase 3. So rinks will be monitoring us. There's self-monitoring going on. Do the best you can with the materials that we've given you. I did talk to Guy Goslin, our ADM regional manager, prior to the Zoom call, and one of the things that I think maybe we can do is help to separate some of the materials from USA Hockey, put them on the Minnesota Hockey website for you in a little bit more clear and concise way, and the coaches on the call can grab those, and I said modify them. We have not come up with practice plans specifically for social distancing, but I looked at probably 20 drills today that are in a station setting and or in a small area game setting, and they're easily modified to keep as much distance as possible. Any questions that have popped up on any of that so far? Okay. If not, the last point is high school involvement in STP programs. High school coaches have also received the same information that you've all received. They received a letter. They've received information from USA Hockey, MIAMA, Minnesota Hockey, and everyone in between, including the High School Federation. They are a separate federation, but they do sit on our board of directors, and we sit on theirs, the high school coaches do. And most summer programs, a lot of summer programs are run by high school coaches, typically using the name summer training programs. They can register those programs to USA Hockey. Some choose to, some don't. They've been notified to work directly with their arena managers and their athletic directors to make sure that they have the proper waivers signed. And also they have a plan going into the rink as well. So they're not in violation of any of the mandates from the Minnesota Department of Health. But they're not beholden to the Minnesota Hockey and or USA Hockey guidelines. But because of our partnerships, most of them will follow the same practices. Glenn, anything else?
No, but if you wouldn't mind also hanging on to the end, and there potentially might be some questions for you.
Oh, no, for sure. Yeah.
Thanks,
you
Mac.
You want to wait for the end for questions, right?
Yeah, questions at the end.
Okay.
Thanks, Mac.
Yep.
One of the biggest issues that all of us in hockey are going to be facing as we get closer to the fall is getting more kids into hockey, as well as keeping some of the kids in hockey that may have played in the past, but due to job losses or whatever the situation may be, hockey might be tougher for them to do this year. So in terms of recruiting and retention, we thought it'd be great to have Katie Holmgren from USA Hockey come on and talk about some of the ways we can best utilize, the associations can best utilize their resources to hopefully get as many kids out to the rink as possible. So thanks for joining us, Katie. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Real quick, for anyone I don't know, I am Katie Holmgren. I'm the Director of Program Services at USA Hockey, and Program Services is the department formerly known as Membership Development. So we're your contact for all things Try Hockey for Free when you use our portal, the Hat Trick Growth Challenge or the old 2-2 Growth Challenge. So obviously we know that this year is going to be a little bit challenging with regard to growth as we sort of ease back into this. So a couple of things we've been telling people, also we're your support for in the form of association leadership, so on the club excellence side. So some positive things. I know a lot of this is hard, and we're trying to get back into things as best we can as states reopen, and it sounds like you guys are getting close to that as well. We're really working on putting together some best practices for our growth initiatives moving forward. So we know that things like Try Hockey for Free days might look a little bit different, but we're hopefully going to adjust all of our resources that we give to you for to include some of these guidelines moving forward, especially as we get into the fall. If you do go on our website, none of those dates are announced for obvious reasons, because the whole country is kind of in different phases. Rinks are already open in Colorado. Things are getting ready to open in Minnesota. You know, Florida's wide open. So we didn't really want to put out any overarching guidelines on any of this. So you're going to see some communication coming from USA Hockey, especially as we move into annual Congress, all virtually for the next couple of weeks, starting next week. But you'll see communication on why we need members to register, and then communicating with your associations. So one thing I'll say that's really good, and I know not every affiliate's doing it, is Minnesota Hockey. First of all, I'm commending you guys for putting this together for your association. So you're opening up that line of communication, but also communicate to the players within your association. And if you see any of our resources that go out weekly to keep kids engaged, you know, the weekend hockey challenges or anything on social media that come from a national standpoint, can't reiterate enough that if you want it tailored to your local association or at the state level or your district, just to keep kids engaged and keep them thinking about hockey and make them feel good about being part of your organization, our communications team is always willing to tailor those to you. We're working on some customizable things similar to our Try Hockey posters that are customizable for you guys to use. And then obviously, as we move forward into what we would normally do for our Try Hockey, we're going to be changing some of those things. So we, as probably a lot of you know, Guy Goslin and the ADM and the coaching group have done some really great coaching webinars. And now that we have some more language and things to move forward from an association standpoint, we are going to start some webinars that are more tailored to your association leadership to talk about things like how to best communicate with your members. So we're putting that together here in the next week. So we know that everybody's kind of struggling with maybe things you can say, or you need to ask somebody some questions. So we're going to talk with our communications team and get some messaging for everybody. So that'll be utilized or be able to be utilized by all of you. And we're talking about the best way we can communicate with our members moving forward. So we're doing our best to talk to different groups around the country and see what they're doing. And the things we know, we talk about rinks. I'm glad you guys have your MIAMA rep on here too. You know, everybody, we're trying to, it's again, changing your thinking a little bit. You think, well, kids are going to want to go play outside and it's an outdoor big open area. But the good part that we have for rinks, and especially in Minnesota, a lot of rinks, is you have a controllable indoor area. So, you know, you have people who are in there cleaning. You know, our rinks were already cleaning locker rooms. Unfortunately, hopefully they'll be a little cleaner now for you guys. But everybody's fully geared up, right? Nobody, you don't have a bunch of kids touching the same basketball or baseball or any of those things. So some controllable things, and we're going to work on messaging and how to positively spin that so we can get your kids back. So retention, so communication with your members is huge. Let us know how we can help you with those communication pieces that we have, and then we'll keep moving forward. And I'll be sure to pass along to Glen and Derek and the group any of the webinars that we have that are focused at association leadership, so that you guys can take part in those as we move forward with some new language and some new guidelines for you.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Katie. With that, we're going to just talk quickly about what's next, and then get into some questions from you guys that came in from the chat, as well as that came in from prior to the call starting tonight. So on this last slide here, that tentative timeline, again, stressing the word tentative, that should almost be in bold and all caps. The key word there is tentative. The dates that we have are goals, but they're not set in stone. But we want to get to them if we can. And if things go well, I'm confident that we can. But phase 2, we're hoping to announce whether we can move into phase 2 by August 1st. And if that's the case, then we will see, the introduction of learn to play programs and things for kids 6 and under. Phase 2 will have a lot of carryover from phase 1. There will be a lot of those same type of guidelines that will carry over, but the hope is that phase 2 starts to include some games, especially at the local level. Right now, I saw a question come in on the chat regarding tournaments, things like that. But phase 3 really feels way out there, even though it's not. But all I can tell you is there's a lot that's going to be discussed. I know I've having a lot of questions about, are tournaments going to happen? Can teams play outside their district? A lot of questions around that. And the honest answer is we don't know. We haven't gotten there yet. There's a lot more, the hockey ops group met to get these guidelines put together for phase 1. There's going to have to be more discussion among Minnesota hockey board members and others on what, the regular season looks like. And I don't want to give you any inkling one way or the other because we just don't know exactly what hockey is going to look like this upcoming winter. But, obviously our hope is that it looks as much like it did before all of this happened. So, but how these phase changes will be determined will that's another tough question that we'll have to kind of figure out as we go. If we feel like things are progressing okay and we're not seeing a huge spike in cases and certainly kids are safe, then we feel good about that. But again, we're subject to government guidelines and direction there. We're going to continue working with the Minnesota Amateur Sports Commission. It's been great to get feedback from other youth sports and groups. And if anything good comes out of this, I think it's that more and more of these sports organizations in Minnesota are working together and trying to do what's best for kids. The ultimate goal here is to get kids back and active because they need youth sports for so many reasons. And hockey is just a piece of that. But we need kids getting exercise. We need them being around kids their age, having fun, getting exercise, all of that. So we'll continue to work with those groups. We'll also keep considering equipment. The other question I've seen a lot come through is Minnesota hockey going to require the clear face shields as opposed to the cage masks? Like I mentioned earlier, they're not in our guidelines right now. USAH Hockey has a sheet that kind of deals with this. I guess the answer is there's no scientific proof that these clear plastic face shields are any better than a cage. However, just common sense prevailing would say that it's likely that it's better than a cage. And so, but it's not going to prevent anything if COVID virus particles get inside that shield and into a kid's face. So that could change if there's more evidence that comes through that, yes, this definitely helps. Then we might revisit that. But as of now, there's no requirement from USAH Hockey or from Minnesota Hockey that kids wear those clear face shields. And then, just associations will need to consider what their plans look like, how they communicate with their families, what happens in the event of a child getting sick or testing positive for the virus. What does that arena do? Things like that. So those are all things that associations should prepare for as we go forward here. Again, use us as a resource. I'll ask Derek to keep this next slide open for a while, which has contact information for myself, for Mike Terwilliger, our hockey programs manager, who's also on this call. and Derek, our marketing manager. We're here, and our cell phone numbers are on there. Although I'm seeing a typo on mine. So if you have a pen, my phone number is 651-253-9229. 9229. So sorry for the error. I would have made my life easier if I hadn't corrected that error and just had it go to a wrong number. But in fairness to whoever has that number, we'll change it. So 651-253-9229 is my cell phone number. Now I'm going to ask Derek, Ricky, to chime in with questions, and myself, Derek, Mike, as well as others who we've heard from tonight can answer those, and as we go, we'll answer as best we can. So Derek, if you want to get into the Q&A portion, we'll go from there.
All right. So I think the first thing that we're going to want to start with, it's come up a few times in a few different capacities, is Mr. Oleheiser, will you touch on a little bit of the USA Hockey registration and why we're really encouraging all members of associations to register for the 2020-21 season, and kind of a little bit of background on that?
Yes, thanks, Derek. Everybody can hear me, I assume. Fact is, I sent out onto everybody on the chat. One of the reasons that we are trying to make sure, or asking everybody to register for the 2020-2021 season, is USA Hockey has currently updated a waiver of liability release form that is specific, or is somewhat specific to COVID-19, that will protect USA Hockey, Minnesota Hockey, associations of Minnesota Hockey, or groups of Minnesota Hockey that are sanctioned through Minnesota Hockey. So we're strongly encouraging that any players that from this day forward, if we can get them to complete that registration, that would be a great thing. Katie and I have been communicating back and forth. They're going to send out some stuff from USA Hockey too, to try to encourage people to not wait till August to register for the upcoming season, but to actually register as soon, before they start playing again. Given that, there may be players or people out there that will not be wanting to do that. So we will, at Minnesota Hockey, somehow we will create a release of liability subject to COVID-19. We will probably have that. I would hope, Derek, we could put that out on our website once we get it up, so that associations can have access to it. And part of the registration process for any program through the summer in this phase one, the players, we need to make sure that they have completed either registration for the 2020-2021 season, or have on file with us a release of waiver for COVID-19. It's only for our own protection and for everybody's protection. So we've already seen that the government has not agreed to release people or release organizations or businesses from liability for COVID-19, although it'd be very difficult, I think, to prove by anybody that a player or a family contracted COVID-19 at one of our events or one of our organization's programs. However, I'm sure that would be tried, for a financial reward of some sort. So we want to make sure that we try to cover all that as much as possible.
Awesome, thank you. Glen, a question here that for you in relation to the pods. A couple of questions in regard to, what's the duration of these pods? Is it a single practice? Is it for a single week, a month, all of phase one? Can you rotate coaches in and out? What is that? I think there's some concern about, coaches being able to be at every single practice with the same pod every time. So could you touch on that a little bit?
Right. Yeah, there's a perfect world scenario and then there's the real world scenario. And so, yeah, in a perfect world, every practice has the exact same kids and coaches there. And the one coach is with these 9 kids and the other coach is with these 9 kids. And they never mix and they never get close to each other, and everyone's there every single day. And we know that that's not necessarily possible. Things come up for coaches. Some kids can't be there certain days. It may be determined that a kid should be with another group rather than this group. So I guess the best answer we can give you is to do the best you can, make common sense decisions, try as best as possible to not mix the groups, knowing that it may be impossible to be perfect at it. And I don't think anyone expects anyone to just have it all perfect. This is such new, uncharted territory for everyone. So it's going to be a learning process for the coaches, figuring things out on the ice. So we understand that it's not going to be perfect, but we also ask that people just do the best they can to follow the safety guidelines so that we can keep kids safe and keep moving forward and hopefully progress towards the next phases in hockey. There was another question too about pods regarding the smaller rinks, the studio sized rinks and things like that. The guidelines came from the state based, those 2 pods of 10 were based on the size of a standard ice rink. So they didn't really give any guidelines on, okay, divide that rink into what a studio rink looks like and what's the number there. I think your best bet, if you have something going on a smaller ice sheet, would just be to keep it at 1 pod of 10 on one of those small ice sheets.
All right. Thanks, Glenn, for touching on that one as well. Another question, and this goes back to one of the things Mr. Perry touched on, so I'm going to unmute him. John, one of the questions that came in before the call tonight was, what happens if someone tests positive? And you touched a little bit on the emergency, having an emergency plan and an alert plan, but would you and/or Glenn touch on a little bit of, what happens if a kid does test positive? What's the reaction look like?
Well, I think what we would want to do, and we talked in our conversations and all the meetings we'd want to have, if the association is running the ice and they're running their kids through, you would want to, again, going back to what Glenn talked about, is have a plan put together in case something like this should happen. And is there a room, a dedicated area in the arena where someone could get moved to that is having symptoms and get them away from the regular pod players? So I would encourage all associations to, as Glenn mentioned, start planning for this worst case scenario. God forbid that it happens, but it's reality, and we're dealt the hand, and we have to deal with it at this point in time. So I would say it would be important for an association to have a plan in case something does happen, how that is going to happen, how the parents are going to be notified, and then at that point in time, how long is that player going to have to stay away from the ice or any tech practices?
Yeah, and I'll add on to that there's a couple of very key points to this. One is that the privacy of the individual has to be kept. So it shouldn't be broadcast to the entire association that player A tested positive, but it should be broadcast that a player has tested positive or players have tested positive. When that happens, you should contact local health officials and let them know about it so that they are aware. And then also talk to the arena. And I might ask Matt Hennen to address this as well as what, in general, what our arenas going to do if there is a case, a positive case of a player that was in that arena. Matt, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, this should be set up within the arena. As the arena manager, the operations manager should have set up a safe area. Is how we would like to see it on the MIAMA side. We would like for the rink managers to establish that and make that known when you go through your plan with your association. And number one, like you said, privacy is number one, safe is number one, keeping everybody contained and having the right PPE, personal gear for everybody, have it available for the coaches. I know in my preparedness plan, I would like to have a 3-ring binder of the coaches to have the kids' names, phone numbers, for everything allowed, just so that it's on hand. So such as if a coach does get infected or sneezed on or coughed on, spit on, that there's a plan there for them, saying if that the director or president of that association is not around, they have a quick link, such as a standard operating procedure, which should come along with the rinks anyway. So I would just make sure that when you do put your plan together as an association, you look through the rink plan and make sure that that's in there.
Matt, what about if there was a case or multiple cases? Has there been discussion on what an arena's protocol would be in terms of shutting down, or how would that be handled?
Yeah, I think at worst case scenario, we could have shut the rinks down for 24 hours. Make sure that we can get through all the user groups, make sure everybody's notified, make sure everybody takes the right precautions. That's just on the safe side. And if we have it very well dialed in and everyone feels safe and returning back to the rink, and maybe a few rules need to be adjusted, and we move forward with that.
Thanks.
As long as we have Matt and Glenn both unmuted, would you two also touch a little bit more on the responsibility of enforcing guidelines? And I think that's a key challenge, and it's been touched on a little bit, but maybe just reinforce that topic.
Yeah, I'll start here because this is a tricky one, because we know what happens in arenas, at least prior to this, is parents huddle together, they get close by, they talk about this and that, and the hope is that that doesn't continue. But what happens if there are 4 or 5 parents all huddled together, or there is a coach running a game on June 10th when there are specifically no games to be played? Who enforces that? Minnesota Hockey isn't going to have anyone going into arenas to check on it. The government's not either, but the arenas aren't going to want to get shut down. But they're also not going to be able to just monitor everything going on the ice. They have their own things going on, especially now. So we'd ask for associations, for other parents, to try and be vigilant in getting others to follow these rules. But I'll ask Matt too. Matt, what do arenas feel about the enforcement of some of the guidelines and regulations from the government, and how they enforce those?
Yeah, it's a pretty good question. It's not really out there, and nothing says anything about it. Number one thing is that you have to walk in, I think, to the arena as we're expecting people to be safe all the way around, and that includes your own diligence of yourself, of your children, of respecting what's going on. Another thing is that a lot of the rinks are understaffed right now. A lot of staff members have been pushed to park departments or been pushed to do other things, or they just simply have shut down and now are being told to open back up, and their staff members are gone. So the enforcement, I think, mostly in most of the plans that will be written for the COVID preparedness plan will go back to the coaching, go back to, thinking smart, acting, how we should act, and keeping respect to the rink. If it's going to happen and that's going to go on, the word's going to spread pretty quickly, and in my eyes, I'm just going to ask you to leave the rink for that session. And just have respect when you come back that that that's not the right thing to do. Providing for the best for everyone is kind of the goal for all of this. We're trying to open up the rink so, like we said earlier, the kids can skate and everyone can be happy, and we can move forward and prove that we are a predictable situation and that we can move forward with this. I just think that cooperation and communication is huge in this state.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Mr. MacMillan, a couple of questions that I want to direct to you. The first one is some questions about the CEP process and how are those coach trainings going to happen? Looking forward to this next fall.
Well, we, like everyone else, are preparing coaching education to return. So we have a group of ADM regional managers, national coaching chiefs from around the country are working on a plan to have right now 3 options that we're looking at: virtual, a webinar format, and live. As Katie said, around the country, there's a different landscape everywhere. And our feeling is that we have to have a multi-phasic approach when we enter the clinic season. We'll probably be opening up clinic registration with sometime after the 4th of July, maybe before that, we hope. Also, our goal in the next couple of weeks is to, if we can pull it off, to start launching clinics early before individuals get back to work, before they get on the ice. So we're diligently working on putting something together. I think the latest you'll see clinic registration is July 4th. I think the soonest you'll see it is probably within 7 to 8 days. Katie can jump in, but I think those dates are pretty close. I see you nodding, so I think I got them, because I know she's part of those conversations as well at the office.
Not as much as you are, but I think everybody's working to get that stuff up as soon as we can, Mac.
We have 2 subcommittees right now working really quickly on the level 1 and 2 virtually. We hope to have it so it's a clinic that you would attend with instructors. If not, it will be in a webinar format. So, and then, like I said, long term, our hope is that we can get to whatever phase we need to get to have in-person smaller clinics, but we just don't know right now if that's going to be a possibility, and we have to be prepared that it might not be. So we will have a plan shortly for everyone. And that'll be communicated, because I think that's important, through Minnesota Hockey, as well as directly through USA Hockey. It'll be communicated both ways, so everyone will hear about that at the association level and coach level.
Mac or Katie, another question just came in. Will the officials seminars kind of be in the same game plan or similar? Any idea?
They're working on that. I don't know that I have a hard update on that. I know they've been diligently working to make sure that the registration's open. I want to say that it opened today for officials for the season, and I know that they're working on kind of the same thing. And there's some cool ideas coming out of that for officials, and like a mentor program. So I don't want to speak out of turn for them, but we got some kind of cool updates on that. There might be some more mentorship. So, we all talk about how at certain ages are at more risk for COVID. And so there's some discussion about having more of a mentor program. So trying to really encourage those officials at the younger levels, that we can get on the ice when play resumes, and maybe the older group wouldn't be quite as comfortable since they're a little bit more at risk, but kind of mentor those other players in a virtual setting or something like that. So I know that they're talking about some different programs to keep enhancing that officials group.
Awesome, thank you. Want to be respectful of everyone's time here, but there were a couple of questions in the chat that came through that I want to make sure we get to. And with that, I have another question for you, Mac. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship with ice rinks and high schools, and what the status is with the high school league and potentially opening school facilities and that sort of thing?
The high school league, there's going to be an announcement, just came out at 5 o'clock this afternoon. So my high school coaches don't even know this yet, but the high school league just pushed back their waiver period for high school players to June 15th. That will run through, I believe, the first week of August. High school coaches, like I said before, have been instructed to communicate with the rinks. And one of the reasons that the high school league was debating keeping June 1st versus moving to June 15th was because they wanted to be consistent with all sports around the state. In schools, I know we're struggling in some areas of even being able to get open in the summertime for gym space. And the high school league tries to keep a level playing field. And I know rinks, I just texted Matt, so he knows this is coming. That, you know, rinks were preparing for high school coaches to be on the ice June 1st. Now, the differences for this group is that waiver period that I'm talking about, that Derek asked about, is just for high school athletes, not for youth athletes. So high school coaches can coach youth players, but the high school player cannot be on the ice until June 15th now, or on the basketball court or on the field or anywhere else.
Well, and along those lines, Mac, I think the question was a little bit related to, you know, anticipating if schools are starting to allow activities, that would insinuate that they may be more apt to open school-owned arenas. Does that make sense? Or the question was, some rinks are owned by schools.
Yep.
So,
Matt can jump in. Very few are owned by schools, but some are, of course. So there's still a cost benefit analysis that has to happen in every community, which is something we really didn't talk about in this call, but we've been talking about it for, like John said, the last 2 months or month, that, you know, some cities and school districts will make the decision to open up and some will not. No different than a nonprofit, and some municipalities will be doing the same. So Derek, I don't know the answer to that, but this may push them not to open. But it also, I think the high school league was feeling, or they're hearing from some of the areas around the state, that they needed more time to open. So I think it's a little bit of an unknown, but maybe Matt can jump in.
Yeah, it's a very unknown, and 85% of the rinks that are within the MIAMA membership are city-owned, city entity. So it's pretty hard, or it's pretty easy also to say in that sense that they're going to follow the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health. And when that falls in line, it kind of breaks down on what is allowed in the rink and what's not, and when they're going to open and not open. Now that June 1st has kind of been a set date, I know that a lot of people are scrambling. Some rinks, like I said, are just trying to pull some staff together just to get a few hours of ice in to make the bills get paid. Other rinks like Fogarty are chomping at the bit and need to get, they've had their ice in the whole time, so they need to get going. They need to get the ball rolling, and, you know, that's also another issue with the private rinks. You know, they want to keep their money going where they're not city subsidized. So
one of the things that I'll lob out there, maybe Katie, I'm sure will like it and smile, is, you know, this might be an opportune time for us to all to talk about, should we start youth hockey registration earlier, do some stuff in the rinks, because, you know, we're all a partner in this game. We need rinks, they need us. Associations, yeah, it's way outside the box. It's a different way of thinking, but you know, once you're registered as a player, that doesn't mean you have to form your team tomorrow. That just means you can do some stuff in that rink. You get yourself insured, you get covered. We start pumping the registration, and it might be just a little different way to look at things. And, you know, maybe I can encourage Ole and Glen and those guys to talk about it a little bit, but it may be a way to prime the pump a little bit, because we do need the arenas. There's no question. We can't have our game. So that was an editorial too.
all right. So I think we're going to try and finish with one last question. And that is, there was a question that came in again along the arena line, but it had to do with dry land. And Glenn, I don't know if you want to touch on this, but maybe just talk a little bit about the difference, or why dry land wasn't included, and why, if associations wanted to do some dry land only, assuming their arena is not open or not putting in ice, what would be some recommendations along those lines?
Yeah, well, the guideline in our packet was that dry land activities should not take place in the arena, and we asked for input from Matt and the MIAMA group on that too. Is we really just think, you know, seeing as how fitness centers and gyms are not open, those areas are high traffic areas where kids will be touching many things and potentially getting close together in an indoor space. So that is not part of the phase one anyway, to have indoor dry land training. The good thing is phase one takes place in June, July. So the hope is that dry land can take place, but it's done outside the arena or somewhere outside, where kids can still get a good workout in. You know, there's plenty of dry land activities you can do that are socially distanced and outside. So at this time, we would not advise any type of dry land training within the arena. And Derek,
Hey, Glennie,
yeah, go ahead, Mac.
can I jump in on that one a little bit? I've had some questions from high school coaches. So I've been encouraging them to use the field outside, stay in their pods at 10, be careful, don't, do the proper guidelines. But to the question, if the rink's not being used, it would be my assumption that they could operate their 10 pods because it's based on square footage, but not do dry land in the facility because of the square footage requirement. Is that a fair statement? If there's no ice on the floor.
If there's no ice on the floor, can they use the dry land equipment within the arena as a pod attack?
Well, dry land might have no equipment. It just might be players doing agility and stick handling and stuff.
So on the ice sheet with no ice.
Correct.
Yes, that would be.
That was
fine.
the question.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Thank you.
I guess I would think that would be fine.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Derek, I did want to make 2 points that I didn't make earlier on. One, we do want to acknowledge on this call tonight how associations have been so impacted by all that's going on, especially when it comes to local businesses that support your associations and how they're affected. Hopefully that their support will come back, but we did want to let you guys know that a task force within Minnesota Hockey has been put together by President Oleheiser to really kind of investigate and work with associations on what can be done to alleviate those problems, some support from Minnesota Hockey. And so that's in its early stages, but we want to help you in terms of finances, recruitment and retention, things like that. So there is a task force put together to deal with that, and wanted to let you know about that. The other point I wanted to make is when we talked about phase 3 and how we don't know what that's going to look like, it doesn't mean associations can't think about ways that they might be able to have hockey look within their association. And I guess that's my way of saying if you thought about doing something different, like an in-house league for mites or squirts or things like that, now might be the time to try that. I can't say it's going to be mandated. Again, we have no idea exactly how hockey is going to look in the fall, and there's so much to be determined there. But if your association feels like, hey, we can do things safer if we do it this way, but it also might be good for the association as a whole, we want you to think creatively and think about doing things like that come fall. Again, doesn't mean it would be mandated, but just something that your association might think about going forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Glenn. With that, I want to invite you and Steve to just put some closing thoughts on the evening, and then we'll wrap up and send everyone on their way.
Sure. I'll just say this. We'll keep doing these. And there was a question of how often will the guidelines be updated and how will that be communicated? That'll be ongoing, but we intend to have these webinars ongoing as well. We don't want you guys to sit all summer waiting until August 1st to get word from Minnesota Hockey on what's next. We'll stay in touch with you every few weeks, but we're available every day if you need to reach out to any of us that were on this call. So please do so. And I'll just say thank you so much to everyone for all that you do. You guys are on the front lines now, and especially as we get to the fall. So I appreciate everything that you guys do and can't thank you enough. And I'll let Steve close out the evening.
Thank you, Glenn. I just want to thank everybody for, all their questions and all their attention to what's going on. As Glenn said, you guys are on the front line for everything now. Be aware that my mantra is Minnesota Hockey is here to support our associations. We're here to support our players and everybody that goes with it. And we want to be a partner. We want to be that support. To Glenn's point, our numbers are, not only have they been, and contact information been posted tonight, it'll be part of the deck that you get. But if you go on Minnesota Hockey website, you can find our my cell phone number is listed on there. My email is listed on there. So don't be afraid if you have some questions that we haven't answered, to reach out to somebody that was on the call or somebody that's on that list that you feel that can answer that question. If we can't get the answer, we'll find the answer. We'll find out what we can do to help you. I know there was a lot of questions that came tonight that we didn't get to. I'm sure that Derek is putting them together right now so that we can get back to you and answer those questions. But thank you very much for everything you guys are doing out there in Minnesota hockey for our players, and what makes Minnesota hockey one of the most admired organizations in sports in this country. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.